The alarm on Maya Torres's phone buzzed at 4:51 in the morning, and she was already awake. She had been awake since 4:15, lying on the fold-out couch in the living room of her one-bedroom apartment in Albuquerque's South Valley, running the same numbers she ran every morning like a rosary she couldn't stop touching. Rent was $480 behind. The electricity bill had a red border on it that she'd been staring at for 2 weeks. Sophia needed new shoes before winter because her toes were pressing white crescents into the canvas of her sneakers. And Mateo had a field trip on Thursday that cost $22 she'd been shuffling around in her head like a card trick, moving it from one imaginary pile to another, hoping the math would change if she rearranged it enough times. It never did. She sat up in the dark and pulled her sweatshirt on over her pajamas because the apartment's heating unit was old and slow to wake up in the mornings, and the November air coming through the window gap she kept meaning to seal had teeth in it. Through the bedroom door, she could hear Sophia and Mateo breathing, two small synchronized rhythms that were the only sound in the world that could make her chest feel full instead of hollow. She made coffee in the kitchen that was also the dining room and also, when the fold-out was open, the bedroom. The coffee maker was the one luxury she allowed herself. Not good coffee. Not even decent coffee. The store brand. The one in the red tin with the price sticker still half peeled on the side because she'd forgotten to pull it off 2 months ago when she bought it. But it was hot and it was hers, and those two things were enough before 5 in the morning. Maya Torres was 36 years old. She had hands that looked older than that, rough and dry from the chemicals at Premier Dry Cleaning on 4th Street, where she worked Tuesday through Saturday from 7 to 3. She had a kind of stillness in her face that people sometimes mistook for serenity, but was really just the practiced expression of someone who had learned not to let the math show. When customers came in with their silk blouses and their wool suits, and their impatient fingers drumming the counter, they didn't see it. They saw a woman in a blue polo shirt who took their garments carefully and wrote their ticket with neat numbers and told them it would be ready Thursday. They didn't see the rideshare driving she did on Sunday evenings while her neighbor Mrs. Pacheco sat with the kids. They didn't see the grocery stock shifts on Monday mornings from 5 to 9 before she went home, changed clothes, and drove to the dry cleaner. They didn't see the calculations, always the calculations, running behind her eyes like a second language she was permanently translating into English and back again. She poured the coffee and stood at the kitchen window. The sky outside was the deep blue-black that comes just before the first gray light, and the city below was quiet enough that she could hear the highway from 3 blocks away, a low hiss that was the sound of other people going somewhere. She had a daughter who believed in her absolutely, and without reservation, the way only 10-year-olds can believe in their mothers, with the wholeness of someone who hasn't yet discovered their hero's full dimensions. She had a son who was 8 and serious and had recently announced that he wanted to be an engineer because engineers, he said, built things that lasted. She had a fold-out couch and a red-bordered electricity bill and $480 of rent she didn't have. She had that, and she had the coffee, and she started her day. Her grandfather Ernesto Torres had called her every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock for 11 years. It was the one fixed point in her week, reliable and warm. His voice coming through the phone from his farmhouse outside of Belen, 60 miles south of Albuquerque, telling her about his garden and the weather and the hawk that had built a nest in the big cottonwood near the barn. He was 90 years old and still sharp as a tack, as he liked to say, tapping his temple when she visited, his dark eyes bright and amused. He called Sophia his little scientist and Mateo his little architect, and he sent $20 bills folded into birthday cards with the careful handwriting of a man who had taken penmanship seriously. He never asked about money. He never asked about Maya's ex-husband, Daniel, who had left 4 years ago for reasons that amounted to the fact that he had not understood what he was getting into when he married a woman who was fundamentally unable to stop trying. He just called every Sunday at 6 and told her about the hawk. The Sunday he didn't call, she knew before she checked the phone. She called back twice. Then she called her Aunt Carmen in Socorro, because Carmen was closest to Belen and because Carmen had a key. Carmen called her back 40 minutes later. Her voice was already arranging itself into the particular shape of family grief that also somehow contained logistics and property and the quiet beginning of questions about what came next. He went in his sleep. Doctor said his heart just stopped. He was 90, Maya. He had a good long life. Maya sat on the fold-out couch with the phone in her lap, and her 2 children asleep in the next room, and let herself cry for exactly as long as she needed to. Not long. She'd been bracing for this for 2 years, and grief that you've been preparing for comes in a cleaner wave. Then she washed her face, checked that the kids were still sleeping, and went back to the kitchen to think. Ernesto's property outside of Belen was 40 acres of high desert scrubland with a stone farmhouse his father had built in 1937, a barn that leaned slightly east, a half-acre garden that Ernesto had maintained with the devotion of a man who needed something living to tend, and an ancient stone and iron well cover in the backyard that everyone had always said was just decorative. He'd had the land for 73 years. He'd kept it immaculate, and he'd been stubborn about it in the way that old men are stubborn about the things they love, which is to say he'd kept everyone off it who didn't have good reason to be there, and he'd fixed every fence post, and painted every shutter, and replaced every window himself until he was 85, when his knees told him to stop. Maya had visited every month. 2 hours down and 2 hours back, Sofia and Mateo in the rear seat with library books and snacks, and Ernesto always had food waiting on the stove, his green chili stew or red rice and beans, and they would sit at the kitchen table and eat, and he would tell the children about the land and about his father Antonio, who had come from Chihuahua with nothing and built something from the desert floor up. Ernesto would sit with them until the kids fell asleep on his couch, and then he and Maya would sit on the back porch in the evenings and watch the light change over the Manzano Mountains and not always say much. That was the thing about her grandfather. He was comfortable with the kind of silence that had substance in it. Nobody else visited. Her uncle Victor drove down twice a year on obligatory Thanksgivings and Easters with his wife Donna and their son Raul, and they spent those visits talking about the land's mineral rights and what Belen was doing to property values, and whether the old house could be renovated or should be torn down, treating the farmhouse like a problem to be solved while Ernesto sat at the head of the table with his bright eyes and said nothing. Aunt Carmen came more often than Victor, but always with the barely concealed agenda of someone cataloging a room they planned to redecorate. She once brought a real estate agent to Sunday dinner without asking, and Ernesto had sent them both home after the appetizers with a politeness so precise it was more devastating than anger. But nobody said any of this out loud. Nobody in the Torres family talked openly about what they were waiting for. They just waited, in the polite way that families wait when there is property involved and an old man in the middle of it. Ernesto's will was read at the office of his attorney, a man named Franklin Archuleta, 3 weeks after the funeral. The funeral itself had been at the church in Belen that Ernesto had attended for 60 years, and the pews had been full in the way that old men's funerals are full, with people who remembered him from decades ago, from a time before his children's children had been born, and the weight of accumulated years sat in the room like something physical. Maya had sat in the front row with Sofia and Mateo on either side of her. Victor and Carmen sat across the aisle with their families, already arranged in the geometry of inheritance, already adjacent to each other in a way that excluded without being obvious about it. Franklin Archuleta's office was downtown in a building that had been renovated sometime in the 90s and not touched since, with carpet the color of old mustard and fluorescent lights that flickered slightly on the left side of the room. 6 family members sat in chairs arranged around a table: Maya, Victor and Donna, Carmen, Raul, and Raul's wife Celine, who had no legal standing there, but had come anyway in the manner of someone who felt her presence was its own form of authority. Franklin Archuleta read the will in the measured tone of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and had learned to be a neutral instrument. The farmhouse and the surrounding 22 acres of the property went to Carmen, who made a brief sound that wasn't quite a word and pressed her hands together in her lap. The east 18 acres with the mineral survey and the water rights went to Victor. The barn, the equipment shed, the tools, the truck, and the tractor went to Raul. Ernesto's savings, a modest account of $19,000, was divided equally between Carmen and Victor, with a smaller portion for a church donation. The furniture, the kitchen equipment, the silver candlesticks that had come from his mother's house in Chihuahua, the television, the bookshelves, and all the books, divided among the family in a list that Ernesto had been specific and deliberate about. Every item matched to a name, so that there was no ambiguity and no room for the arguments that had happened in other families he had watched tear themselves apart over a dining table. Maya's name appeared once in the list of specific items. The ornamental well cover in the rear yard of the property, Mr. Archuleta read, and his voice did not change. I leave to my granddaughter Maya Elena Torres, who visited me when others did not, and who understands, I believe, the difference between what something appears to be worth and what it is truly worth. The cover is hers to do with as she sees fit. The silence in the room was the kind that had a texture. Then Victor cleared his throat. He was a large man in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the particular confidence of someone who had made money in commercial real estate and wore it on his face like a second skin. He'd spent his entire professional life in environments where his opinion arrived before he did. He looked at Maya across the table with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite contempt, but moved in that direction with comfortable ease. Well, he said, that's the well cover. I guess that makes sense. Raul, who was 34 and had his father's confidence without having earned the reasons for it, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. The smile he offered was the kind people give when they think they're being subtle about laughing. What are you going to do with it, Maya? Put it in your apartment? Donna patted Victor's arm with a hand that carried 3 rings and said nothing, which was its own kind of commentary. Carmen looked out the window and seemed to be calculating something. Maya looked at Franklin Archuleta, who looked back at her with the careful neutrality of a man who had seen this particular scene in many variations and had long ago decided that his job ended at the reading and did not extend to the reactions. His expression was not unkind, but it was not anything else either. She looked down at the table. She thought about what her grandfather had said the last time she'd sat on the back porch with him, 3 months ago, in August, when the air was still hot after sundown and the mountains turned purple in the distance. He had been quiet for a long time, the comfortable silence kind, and then he'd looked at her sideways with those bright eyes and said, "You know what your problem is, Mija?" She'd waited. "You think small because the world told you to. But the world is wrong." She'd laughed. She hadn't known what else to do with that. Now, sitting in Franklin Archuleta's office with the fluorescent light flickering and her family arranged around her like an illustration of something she'd never been told the name of, she thought about it again. The world is wrong. She looked up at Raul. "I'll take it," she said. "Thank you." Raul looked at Victor. Victor looked at Carmen. Carmen looked back out the window. Nobody said anything else that mattered. The well cover was too heavy to move alone. That was the first practical problem. It was a single piece of dressed sandstone about 4 feet across and 8 inches thick, edged in hand-forged iron that had been bolted into the stone in a pattern that looked almost decorative but held with the grip of something built to last. The iron had oxidized to a dark rust red that was actually beautiful if you looked at it the right way, and the stone itself was carved around its circumference with a pattern of interlocking suns that Maya had always loved as a child, running her small fingers along the grooves when Ernesto wasn't looking, because he always asked her not to touch it, and she'd never known why. She'd been 12 the first time she'd asked him what was in the well. "Nothing anymore," he had said, and his voice had been even, the way voices are even when they are being deliberately careful. "It dried up long before you were born. It's just a cover now. Something my father made. Leave it be." She'd left it be. For 24 years, she'd left it be, because you left things be when Ernesto Torres told you to, not out of fear but out of respect, because he was a man who only said things once and the weight of a single statement from him was usually enough to hold. But he was gone now, and he had left it to her. And something about that combination, the decades of leave it be followed by the deliberate and specific act of putting her name next to it in a legal document, sat in her chest like a question she hadn't been asked yet. She drove to Belen that first Saturday after the will reading in her 2008 Chevy Impala with the rear driver's side window that didn't roll all the way down and the check engine light that had been on for so long she had stopped seeing it. Sophia sat in the back with a spiral notebook and Mateo sat beside her, drawing something architectural in pencil. They had both been told they were going to pick up something from great-grandfather's house, and Sophia had asked if it was something important, and Maya had said she thought so. And Sophia had accepted this with the particular open-ended trust of a child who believes her mother has reasons for things even when the reasons aren't fully explained. The farmhouse looked different empty. It had only been 3 weeks, but the quality of light inside the windows had already changed, that specific absence that a house acquires when the person it was built around is gone. Carmen had a locksmith coming Monday to change the locks. Maya had the old key still on her keyring, and she used it one last time. letting herself in through the kitchen door and standing in Ernesto's kitchen for a moment before the children caught up with her. The green chili stew wasn't on the stove. The table was clean in the wrong way, the way surfaces are clean when they've been wiped down by someone who is cleaning up rather than someone who lives there. The hawk's nest was probably still in the cottonwood out back. She hadn't checked yet. She stood at the window above the kitchen sink and looked out at the backyard. The well cover sat in its stone platform about 30 feet from the house, the same as always, circled by its ring of flat stones that Ernesto had laid himself, its iron edging catching the November light, its carved suns patient and unchanged. "Maya," Sophia said behind her. She turned. Mateo was holding a piece of paper. He had found it on the kitchen table, under the edge of a dish towel that hadn't been there the last time Maya visited, placed with the specific deliberateness of something left intentionally rather than forgotten. The paper was folded in thirds. Her name was written on the front in her grandfather's handwriting, the letters large and careful and slightly shaky in the way his writing had gotten in the last 2 years. Her hands were steady as she opened it. She would not understand why they were steady until later, when she thought back on this moment and realized that some part of her had been waiting for this, had known there was something coming, had sensed the current of it beneath the surface of the ordinary for longer than she could articulate. The letter was short. "Mija," he had written, "if you are reading this, then you found it where I left it, which means you came back to the house, which means you are exactly who I always knew you were. I have been trying to find the right words for 60 years, and I am running out of time to find better ones, so these will have to do. My father Antonio built the cover in 1941. He built it to last, and it has. What is under the cover has lasted longer. I could not tell you while I was alive because I was afraid of what it would do to people who love money more than they love each other. And this family has those people in it. You know who they are. You have always known, even when you were kind enough not to say so. I am leaving it to you because you are the only one who came. Not for what I might leave you, but for me. The key to understanding is the cover itself. Look at the iron. Find the fourth sun from the east on the inner ring. Press and hold. What my father hid is what I have protected. What I have protected is now yours. Spend it on the children. Spend it on yourself. You have earned rest. Do not be afraid. Your grandfather who loved you, Ernesto." Maya read the letter twice. Then she folded it precisely along its original creases and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket. Sophia was watching her. So was Mateo. Her children had the particular stillness that children get when they sense that something real is happening. "Everything okay, Mom?" Mateo asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "Help me look at the well." The well cover was heavier than it looked, which was saying something because it looked extremely heavy. Maya crouched beside the iron edge and examined it, running her fingers along the circumference the way she used to as a child when Ernesto wasn't watching. The pattern of interlocking suns around the outer ring was familiar to her. She had traced it so many times in childhood that she could have reproduced it from memory. But her grandfather's letter had said inner ring, and she'd always focused on the outer edge. She moved closer and looked at the underside of the iron edging where it met the stone. There was a second ring she'd never noticed, narrower, about an inch wide, with smaller sun patterns pressed into it. They were worn smooth with age, but still distinct. She counted from the east-facing edge of the cover. Fourth sun. The iron was raised very slightly at that point, almost imperceptibly, just enough that a finger pressing into it would find resistance where the others gave slightly. She pressed. Nothing. She pressed harder and held. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. A sound. Not a loud sound. A soft internal click, like a latch releasing somewhere deep in the stone. The sound of a mechanism that had been engineered not to announce itself. Then the iron ring shifted, rotating perhaps a 1/4 inch counterclockwise with a grinding sensation that traveled up through the stone platform into the soles of Maya's shoes. The cover didn't lift, but something had changed. She could feel it in the way the weight redistributed when she pressed against one edge. The thing that had been locked was no longer locked. She couldn't move it alone. Even unlocked, the stone disc weighed hundreds of pounds. She would need help. She would need equipment. She thought with a strange, almost sideways certainty, to be very careful about who she told. She stood up slowly and brushed the grit off her knees. Sophia and Mateo were watching her from the back porch steps with wide eyes and the admirable restraint of children who could sense that questions would be answered in their own time. We're going to need to come back, Maya said. With different tools. What's in there? Sophia asked. Maya thought about the letter in her jacket pocket. She thought about 60 years. She thought about her grandfather sitting on this porch in the evenings watching the mountains go purple while inside the house. Inside the well, inside the cover he had built to last, something waited with the patience of stone. I don't know yet, she said, but I think Abuelo wanted us to find out. She drove back to Albuquerque in the gathering dark, both kids quiet and full of questions they hadn't yet decided to ask out loud. She drove and thought and did not let herself hope too specifically, because specific hope was dangerous in a way that general hope was not. General hope was just forward motion, just the thing that got you out of bed at 4:51 in the morning, into the coffee maker, and through the day. Specific hope was a target you drew on your own chest. But she thought about what her grandfather had said on the porch in August. You think small because the world told you to. And she thought about the letter. What my father hid is what I have protected. What I have protected is now yours. Antonio Torres. She hadn't known much about him beyond the outline of a story. The man who came from Chihuahua with nothing, who built the farmhouse in 1937, who died in 1968 when Ernesto was already a grown man with children of his own. She knew he had worked in the mines. Her grandfather had mentioned it rarely and briefly, the way people mention things they know more about than they're saying. He worked the mines south of here when I was young, Ernesto had said once. Before the war, he was good with his hands and good with numbers. He knew the value of things. He knew the value of things. Maya drove and let that sentence sit in her chest and told herself she would not open the door of what it might mean until she had more information, until she had seen what was under the cover, until she was sure. She had two problems. The first was practical. She could not move the cover alone, and she could not afford to hire someone without creating a record of it, and she did not fully know yet what she was dealing with or who else might have claimed to it. The second was emotional. She needed to tell someone, and the person she most naturally would have told had just died, and the absence of that option was a cold and specific weight. She called her friend Delia on Monday night after the kids were in bed. Delia Reyes had been her closest friend for 15 years, since they'd worked together at a hotel downtown and bonded over the particular solidarity of people who are constantly underestimated. Delia was 42 and worked in logistics and had the kind of practical intelligence that was worth more in an actual emergency than any credential Maya could think of. She told Delia everything. The will, the well cover, the letter, the click of the latch, the fourth son. She spoke quietly and clearly and didn't editorialize. Delia was quiet for a moment when she finished. You think he really hid something in there? He said his father hid it. He said he protected it. Maya, Delia's voice was even. What do you think is in a well on a New Mexico farm that's been locked since 1941? I don't know. Yes, you do. You're just afraid to say it. She was right. Maya knew what Antonio Torres had done for work. She knew where the farmland was positioned relative to the gold mining operations that had run through those hills in the 1930s. She knew that the Depression had happened, that banks had failed, that a man who worked with precious metals and knew their value and had grown up watching money disappear might have made a different choice about where to keep his security. She knew that the cover was built to last, that the mechanism inside it still worked after 80 years, that her grandfather had protected it his entire life and died choosing her name to receive it. She knew. She just hadn't said it. I think it might be gold, she said. I think his father might have hidden gold. The silence on Delia's end lasted long enough to feel like its own kind of confirmation. Okay, Delia said finally. I'm taking Friday off. We're going down there with a come-along and a generator, and we're going to find out. Victor called on Wednesday. She saw his name on the screen and almost didn't pick up, then picked up because not picking up would tell him something she wasn't ready to tell. Just checking in on you, he said, which wasn't true. Victor Torres did not check in on people. He assessed situations. How are the kids? Good. They're good. Good, good. A pause that breathed with agenda. Listen, I talked to Carmen. We were thinking about the property, the division of it. The well cover specifically. You know that cover is sitting on what's legally my land now, right? The back section with the well platform. That's part of the 22 acres Carmen inherited. Maya kept her voice level. Abuelo left the cover to me. The cover, sure. Right, absolutely. But you'd need access to Carmen's property to get it, and Carmen's thinking she might want to landscape that area. Probably fill in the well, cap it properly. It's a liability otherwise. Open old well on the property. She's going to fill in the well. She's thinking about it. Probably sooner rather than later. You know how she is about getting things done. Another pause. I just wanted to give you a heads up, in case you want to come get the cover before that happens. Might be difficult to move once the well's been filled in. Maya held the phone and breathed. In her chest, something that had been uncertain became suddenly precise. I'll come get it, she said. This weekend. Sure. That works. Let us know if you need anything. He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and thought about the specific efficiency of that phone call. The way it had been designed to create urgency, to flush her out, to make her move before she was ready. The call of a man who suspected something was there and wanted to be in position when it was found. She called Delia back. We're going Friday, she said. First thing. Friday came with the low gray sky of a New Mexico November, a sky that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain or not, and had settled for making everything feel provisional. They left Albuquerque at 6:30, Maya and Delia in the front of the Impala, the kids in the back, because school was out for a teacher workday, and Maya hadn't wanted to leave them with anyone, hadn't wanted to say where she was going or why. In the trunk, a come-along hand winch Delia had borrowed from her brother-in-law, 2 heavy-duty ratchet straps, a portable generator, a shop light, a length of climbing rope Delia had bought specifically for this purpose, and the folded letter from Ernesto's kitchen table. Sophia read her book. Mateo drew engineering sketches in pencil. Delia drove because Maya's hands weren't quite steady, though she would not have admitted that to anyone. Tell me again what you think is down there, Delia said, keeping her eyes on the highway. His father worked the mines from about 1932 to 1941. That's 9 years of working in proximity to extracted gold. He was an assayer, not just a laborer. He knew the material. The Depression had just gutted every bank in the country. A man like Antonio, a man who came from nothing and built something and watched his savings disappear in 1929, he would have had a philosophical problem with paper money after that, with institutions. So he converted. That's what I think. And kept it in a well. His own well, on his own land. With a cover he built himself and a locking mechanism he designed himself. And then he told one person, his son. Delia drove in silence for a moment. And his son kept it his whole life. His whole life. Why wouldn't he use it? Maya had thought about this. Had thought about it Wednesday night and Thursday night, and in the gray early hours of Friday morning before the alarm went off. I think he was afraid. Not of the money itself. Of what it would do to the family. To people who love money more than they love each other. She was quoting the letter. He watched his children grow up, and he saw who they were. And he decided that giving them that kind of wealth would be giving them something they weren't ready for. Or something that would hurt them. Or hurt each other. But he gave it to you. He gave it to me. Delia didn't say anything to that. The highway stretched ahead of them, flat and gray, and the Manzanos rose on the eastern horizon like something patient. What if there's nothing there? Delia said finally. What if it's just a dry well? Maya looked out the window at the passing desert, at the scrub and the cholla and the late-season yellow grass bending in the wind. Then we'll have driven 2 hours for nothing, and we'll go get breakfast in Belen and come home, she said. But he left it to me. He wrote me a letter. He told me to look at the fourth son. Men don't write letters like that and build mechanisms like that to protect a dry well. In the back seat, Mateo looked up from his sketches. Mom, what's in the well? She met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Serious, dark eyes, her father's eyes in her son's face. We're going to find out, she said. The farmhouse sat quiet under the gray sky, and the hawk was still in the cottonwood. Maya heard it before she saw it, the high sharp cry from above, and looked up to find the bird sitting on the edge of its nest watching them arrive with the composed indifference of a creature that has decided nothing on the ground concerns it. She took that as some kind of sign, though she couldn't have said of what exactly. Carmen's new lock was on the front door, a brushed nickel deadbolt that looked aggressively modern against the weathered wood frame. But Carmen had not yet changed the lock on the back gate, the one that opened onto the rear yard from the gravel drive, and Maya's old key still worked there. She stepped through into the yard, and the well cover was exactly where it had always been, patient and permanent on its ring of flat stones, the carved suns catching what pale light the sky offered. Delia got the equipment out of the trunk. Mateo helped without being asked, carrying the rope with both hands and taking the job seriously. Sophia stood near the back porch steps with her book pressed to her chest and watched. It took 40 minutes to rig the come-along to the iron frame of the barn door and attach the straps to the well cover's iron edge. The mechanism required 3 anchor points and a specific angle of pull that Delia's brother-in-law had mapped out on a piece of graph paper that Delia consulted twice, frowning, before declaring it good. "Ready," Delia said. Maya crouched beside the cover and pressed the fourth sun again. Held it. The click came, quieter in the daylight somehow, more precise. She felt the iron ring rotate its quarter-inch. "Ready," she said. Delia worked the come-along with slow, even strokes. The straps went taut. The stone and iron disc resisted with the resistance of something that has not moved in a very long time. A resistance that was less about weight than about the accumulated stillness of decades. Then, gradually, with a grinding protest that sent grit scattering across the stone platform, it lifted. 1 inch. 2. 3. The smell that came up from the opening was not the smell of water or decay. It was dry and mineral and ancient, the smell of still air that has been sealed away from weather and time. The smell, Maya would think later, of something preserved. She set the shop light on its highest setting and shone it down into the shaft. The well was lined with fitted stone that Antonio Torres had laid himself, each piece mortared with the care of a man who built things to last. The shaft dropped straight down into darkness, further than the shop light could reach from the surface. But at roughly 15 feet down, on the north side of the shaft, there was a ledge. Not a natural ledge. A constructed one, fitted stone like the rest, but horizontal, jutting out from the shaft wall at a slight angle, and on the ledge, barely visible at the edge of the light, the dull gleam of something metal. Maya crouched at the edge of the opening and looked down for a long time without speaking. Behind her, she heard Sophia come off the porch steps, heard her daughter cross the flat stones and stop at the edge of the platform, heard the small intake of breath when Sophia saw the light going down into the earth and the ledge and what was on the ledge. "Mom," Sophia said. Her voice was very quiet. "What is that?" Maya looked down at the glint of metal in the still, sealed dark of her great-grandfather's well and felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been braced against weight for so many years that the absence of it was almost disorienting. "I think," she said carefully, steadily, "it might be everything." She looked at Delia, who looked back at her with wide eyes and a controlled expression that was itself a kind of answer. "We're going to need rope," Maya said. "And we're going to need to be very careful about who else finds out about this." Delia was already uncoiling the climbing rope. Mateo had put down his sketchbook and come to stand beside his sister. He looked down into the shaft, then up at his mother, then back into the darkness. "Is this real?" he said. Maya placed her hand flat on the stone surface of the well platform, warm from whatever pale sun had broken through the clouds, solid and ancient, and waiting for exactly this long. "It's real," she said. She had no idea yet what real meant in terms of numbers. No idea of the scale of what her great-grandfather had hidden and her grandfather had protected through 9 decades and 3 generations, through world wars and recessions, and all the accumulated ordinary survival that had bent and bowed and eventually broken everyone in her family except the one man who had known. She didn't know yet about the chamber beyond the ledge, sealed with a fitted stone door that swung inward on a counterweight hinge so perfectly balanced that it required almost no force to move. She didn't know about the rows of iron-bound wooden crates that had sat in that sealed, dry, temperature-stable dark since 1941. She didn't know about the bars or the coins or the carefully maintained ledger in a waterproof tin that recorded every piece and its weight in her great-grandfather's precise and careful hand. She didn't know that the total would eventually be assessed at $323 million. She didn't know any of that yet. She just knew the feeling of her grandfather's letter in her jacket pocket. She knew the click of the fourth sun. She knew the smell of preserved air rising from the shaft, mineral and ancient and clean. She knew her daughter beside her and her son beside her daughter and her friend at her back with a rope in her hands and her grandfather's voice in her memory saying, "You think small because the world told you to." She reached for the rope. "Let's go see what Antonio left us," she said. And she began to descend. The rope was good rope, the kind Delia bought, thick and braided and smelling of the hardware store. Maya had tied it to the iron frame of the come-along in a knot that Mateo had actually looked up on his phone before she descended, because her son was the kind of person who needed the right knot for the specific situation and had decided this was a Bolin, which the internet confirmed was correct for load-bearing descents. She had looked at him over the edge of the well shaft and felt something that was too complicated to be called just love, something wider than that, something with the whole shape of the future in it. Then she had lowered herself into the earth. The shaft was narrow. Her shoulders cleared the stone lining with about 8 inches to spare on each side, which was enough, but the kind of enough that you noticed. The stone under her hands was cold and slightly rough, fitted with the same precision she'd seen in the farmhouse walls, the work of a man who didn't do anything carelessly. She descended hand over hand with her feet braced against the stone, moving slowly, feeling the temperature drop with each foot she went down. At around 10 feet, the light from the surface became a gray circle above her, and the shop light Delia had aimed down the shaft was her primary illumination, casting a hard white beam that made sharp shadows of every stone. At 15 feet, her feet found the ledge. She stood on it carefully, testing her weight, both hands still on the rope. The ledge was solid, engineered solid. Antonio had built it to hold weight, had known someone would stand here eventually, had designed for that moment. She looked at what was on it. 3 objects, sitting in a row against the north wall of the shaft. A tin box, the size of a shoebox, sealed with a wire latch. A small wooden crate, roughly 18 inches by 12. Its surface dark with age but intact, the wood dense and hardened. And beside the crate, hanging from an iron hook driven into the mortar between stones, a single key on a leather cord. The leather was old but preserved, dry from the sealed air, supple enough still that it moved slightly when she touched it. She took the key first, then the tin box. She put them both in the canvas bag she'd worn slung across her chest, the one Mateo had packed for her with the exact seriousness of a boy who had appointed himself supply officer for this expedition. She pulled out her phone flashlight and aimed it to her left, at the wall of the shaft directly beside the ledge. What she had taken, from the surface, to be a fitted stone in the shaft lining was something else. She could see that now, in the close direct light, could see the hairline gap around 3 of its 4 edges, the 4th edge being the hinge side, mortared seamlessly into the wall so that from above it read as just another stone. A door, 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall, flush with the shaft wall, opened from this side by a recessed iron pull that had been set into the face of the stone with enough depth that it didn't protrude, couldn't be snagged by a rope or seen from above. Antonio Torres had built a hidden door in the wall of a well and had made it invisible from every angle except the one you could only reach by descending. She pulled the recessed handle. The door swung inward on hinges so perfectly balanced that a single hand was sufficient. No grinding, no resistance. Decades of stillness, and it opened with the ease of something that had been built for exactly this purpose and then waited, with the patience of stone and iron and the absolute stillness of sealed air, for the day it would be needed. Beyond the door was darkness. She shone the flashlight through the opening. The beam caught the near edge of the chamber first, stone floor, dry, clean, free of debris. Then the near wall, fitted stone, smooth, the same work as the shaft. Then, as she angled the light further into the space, the rows. Iron-bound wooden crates, stacked 2 high, arranged in rows along 3 walls of a chamber that was roughly 12 feet by 10. Her flashlight swept across them in the still silence of the sealed space, and she counted the stacks before she counted anything else, the way you would count the people in a room before you counted the furniture. 14 stacks of crates. Some stacks 2 high, some 3. Perhaps 40 crates in total, perhaps more. She stood on the ledge with one hand on the rope and the other holding her phone and looked into her great-grandfather's secret for what felt like a very long time, and was probably 30 seconds, and she did not move, and she did not speak, and she did not breathe more than was strictly necessary for survival. Then she heard Delia's voice from above, distant but clear in the cold shaft. "Maya, what do you see?" She looked up at the gray circle of sky above her. She could make out Delia's face at the edge, and beside her, smaller, her daughter's face and her son's face. All 3 of them looking down into the shaft with expressions she couldn't read from 15 feet below. She thought about what her grandfather had said. You think small because the world told you to. Pull me up, she said. Her voice was steady. I need to make a phone call. She climbed out of the shaft and sat on the stone platform with her back against the iron edging of the well cover and her hands in her lap, and said nothing for a moment. Delia sat beside her. Mateo sat on her other side. Sophia stood in front of her with that specific quality of attention that her daughter had always possessed, the quality of someone who understands that the right thing to do right now is to be completely present and completely still. There's a chamber, Maya said, behind a door in the shaft wall, about 15 feet down. She paused. There are crates. Delia's voice was very controlled. What kind of crates? Iron-bound wooden ones. Old. Stacked in rows. She looked at the tin box in her lap. I brought up the box he left on the ledge. What's in the box? I don't know yet. She looked at the tin, at the wire latch, at the surface that had sat in the sealed dark of a well shaft for the better part of a century. I think this is where he explains everything. She opened the latch. The tin lid lifted with a slight resistance from the rubber seal around its rim, a seal that had been placed there deliberately, a seal that explained why the contents were in the condition they were in. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth that had preserved them with the devotion of something that understood its purpose, were two items. The first was a ledger. Small, bound in dark cloth, its spine still intact. She opened it with careful fingers. The handwriting inside was precise and neat, each entry numbered and dated, beginning in March of 1932 and ending in November of 1941. Columns across each page. Date, weight in troy ounces, form, source, total running weight. He had recorded every acquisition, every piece. The form column used abbreviations she had to work out. Bar, coin, grain, ingot. The source column was more guarded, initials and codes she couldn't fully decode, though some entries simply said mine in a shorthand that needed no translation. She turned to the last entry. November 14th, 1941. The date was 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor. The final running total was in the far right column in Antonio's careful hand. She looked at the number for a long time. She had been a person who ran numbers in her head every morning, who knew the cost of electricity and groceries and shoes to the decimal, who could tell you without checking what she had in her checking account, because she had always had to know, always had to carry the math of survival in her body like a second skeleton. She knew numbers. She understood what they meant in the actual physical world of things that could be bought and couldn't be bought and just barely could be bought if you were careful. The number in the ledger was not a number from that world. Delia, she said. Yeah. She held the ledger out. Delia looked at the final column. Delia made a sound that wasn't a word. The second item in the tin was another letter. Not from Ernesto this time. The handwriting was different, more formal, the letters more precisely formed, the hand of a man who had learned penmanship from a teacher who took it seriously. The paper was old and slightly brittle at the edges, but legible, preserved by the waxed cloth and the sealed air. It was dated October 1967. Ernesto would have been in his early 40s then. Son, Antonio had written, and the single word of address sat at the top of the page like a stone. Son, I am getting old and my hands are not what they were, and I think it is time I told you the complete truth about what is in the well, since I have told you only the part of it that was necessary for you to protect it, and not the part that would have made protecting it too heavy a burden. I began in 1932. You were not born yet. Your mother and I had lost everything in 1929 like everyone else lost everything. And I had taken the job at the processing operation because it was the only work a man with my skills could find that was still paying. I was good at my work. I was precise. I was trusted. I am not going to write here all the details of what I did or how I did it because some things are better left without complete documentation. But I will say that I did nothing that I am ashamed of, and I took nothing that did not come to me through means that I believed were just. And I kept perfect records of everything I acquired because I am a man who believes that if you cannot account for a thing, you should not possess it. Over 9 years, I converted what I accumulated into the most permanent form I knew. Not paper, not promises, not the goodwill of institutions that had already proven they could not be trusted with other people's lives. Weight, density, the thing itself, in the most permanent form it takes. I put it in the well because the well was mine. My land, my stone, my hands, my design. I sealed it because I had seen what happens to men who let the wrong people know what they have. I told you about it and only you, because you are the person I trust most in this world, and because someday you will need to decide what happens to it. I want you to know the total, Ernesto. I want you to know what is down there, so that the weight of protecting it is the real weight, and not an imagined one." The number followed, written in full, every digit, no abbreviation. Maya looked at that number. Then she looked at Sofia and Mateo, standing on the stones of a New Mexico farmyard in the November light, watching their mother hold a letter written 57 years before they were born by a man who had converted survival into metal and sealed it in the earth, and trusted his family to find the right moment for it. "Mom," Mateo said carefully. "How much?" She folded the letter along its original lines. "Enough," she said. "More than enough." He considered this with the seriousness of a boy who did not accept imprecision. "I'm going to need a number, Mom." She looked at him. She looked at Sofia. She looked at Delia, who was looking back at her with an expression that was trying to be calm and not entirely succeeding. She said the number out loud. Not the 1941 number from the ledger, which was the weight and acquisition figure, but the number that the weight translated to at current gold prices, the number she had been doing in her head since she'd read the ledger, the rough calculation that her mind had run automatically, because she was a woman who always ran the numbers. The silence that followed was the kind that rings. Sophia sat down on the stone platform with no warning, just folded at the knees and sat, looking at a point somewhere past the barn with the expression of someone whose brain has received information it doesn't yet have a framework for. Mateo did not sit down. He stood very still and looked at his mother. "We need to be smart about this," he said. He was 8 years old. "We do," she agreed. "We need to not tell Uncle Victor," he said. "We are not going to tell Uncle Victor," she said. She didn't tell anyone else that day. She locked the well shaft cover back into place, engaged the mechanism, made sure the iron ring had rotated back to its sealed position. She photographed the inside of the chamber through the door before she closed it, careful photographs with her phone, wide angle and detail, each row of crates, the stone walls, the floor, the fitted ceiling. She photographed every page of the ledger. She photographed Antonio's letter and Ernesto's letter. Then she put the ledger and both letters back in the tin, sealed the tin back in the canvas bag, and carried it to the car. She drove to Belen and bought the four of them lunch at a diner on the main street. Green chili cheeseburgers and piñon coffee for the adults and Cokes for the kids, and they sat in a booth by the window with the November light coming in flat and pale, and ate without talking much, because there was too much to say and no order to say it in yet. At one point, Delia said, quietly, looking at her coffee, "You need a lawyer before you do anything else." "I know. Not a family friend. Not someone from around here. Someone with no connections to the Torres family." "I know. And you need an appraiser. Someone who can verify the gold and document its value officially. For legal protection." "I know. Maya." She looked up. Delia leaned across the table. "You know what this means, right? You actually understand what this means for you and your kids." Maya looked at the window. At the main street of Belen, scrolling past outside, a tire shop, a hardware store, a laundromat with a hand-lettered sign in the window. Small businesses, all of them. The whole grammar of the life she had always lived. "I'm trying to," she said. "I'm going to need a minute." Delia leaned back. "Take the minute. You've earned it." Sophia reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's. That was the minute. That right there, her daughter's hand on hers in a diner in Belen, November light coming through the window, the sound of the grill and the cash register, and the ordinary noise of a town going about its Friday, while in the earth half a mile south of them, locked behind a door that only she knew how to open, her great-grandfather waited with a patience that had outlasted everything he had feared and everything he had hoped for. She turned her hand over and held her daughter's fingers. "Okay," she said. "Let's go home and figure out what comes next." The lawyer's name was Patricia Osei. She ran a firm in Santa Fe that specialized in estate law, property rights, and what her website described, in clean professional language, as complex inheritance disputes. She had not gone to law school in New Mexico. She had not grown up in New Mexico. She had no existing connections to the Torres family and had, as far as Maya could determine, no connection to anyone who did. She had a 9.8 rating on every legal review site, and her clients consistently described her with words like relentless and thorough, and the kind of person you want on your side when the people on the other side have more money than you do. Maya called her on Monday morning from the dry cleaning shop break room. The door closed. Her voice low, speaking quickly and precisely, because she had her break 10 minutes, and she had learned to be efficient with time the way she had learned to be efficient with everything else. Patricia Osei listened without interrupting. When Maya finished, there was a pause that felt like evaluation rather than confusion. You haven't told any family members what you found. No. And you've documented everything. Photographs of the contents, the ledger, the letters. Yes. And the will is unambiguous. The well cover is yours. The specific language is the ornamental well cover in the rear yard of the property. My name. Sole beneficiary. Another pause. The cover is yours. The question is going to be what is considered part of the cover and what is considered a separate asset. The chamber and its contents were not referenced explicitly in the will. They were referenced in my grandfather's letter to me, which he wrote himself and which was left on his property and addressed to me. That letter is not a legal document. It's important context, but it's not a will. Maya's hands were steady on the phone. She had been expecting this. She had thought about it on Sunday night, lying on the fold-out couch staring at the ceiling. What do I need to do? Come to my office. Bring the photographs, both letters, the ledger images, everything. Don't bring any of the physical items from the shaft. Don't remove anything from the property until we've established your legal position clearly. Don't tell anyone what you found. Don't react publicly if and when other family members ask questions about the property. My uncle called me last week. He was trying to get me to go to the property sooner, before I was ready. He might have suspected something. What specifically did he say? She repeated the call. Patricia Osei listened without interrupting. When she finished, the lawyer's voice was very precise. Your uncle suspects the well may contain something of value. He may have known about it, may have been told, may have simply sensed from the will's language that your grandfather was communicating something specific. In any case, he is now motivated. How quickly can you come to Santa Fe? Wednesday. I have to arrange the kids. Wednesday at 2. Don't talk to your uncle, your aunt, or any other family member about the property between now and then. If they call, be noncommittal. You're grieving. You're busy. You'll be in touch soon. She was noncommittal. She was grieving. She was very, very busy. Patricia Osei's office was on a side street in downtown Santa Fe, in an adobe building that had been there since before New Mexico was a state. The interior was spare and purposeful. Good lighting, real books on real shelves, a desk that was a working surface rather than a status symbol. Patricia herself was 51, small and precise, with the quality of someone who was always the most prepared person in any room she entered, not as a performance, but as a discipline. She reviewed everything Maya had brought without speaking for 25 minutes. Maya sat across the desk and waited and did not try to fill the silence because she had learned, in 36 years of dealing with people who had more institutional authority than she did, that unnecessary talking was always a concession. Patricia set the last page down and looked up. The well cover belongs to you. That's clear. The physical structure of the well shaft itself is arguably part of the cover's platform and foundation, which strengthens your claim to the shaft and anything built into it. The chamber, however, is a separate construction. It was built into the earth below the property, which is now owned by your Aunt Carmen. He built the chamber on his own land, which at the time of construction was all one parcel. Your grandfather later subdivided the property in his will. Whether the contents of a chamber beneath Carmen's land now constitute part of her inheritance or a separate asset that predates the subdivision is genuinely complex. There is case law on both sides. Maya looked at her hands. What are our options? Option 1. You assert a claim to the chamber and its contents as an extension of the well cover inheritance, relying on your grandfather's clear intent as expressed in his personal letter. This will likely be contested by Carmen and possibly by Victor. It will be litigated. It could take 2 years or more. I don't have 2 years. I understand. Option 2. You negotiate a private settlement with Carmen before this becomes a public legal dispute. You disclose what you've found, offer her a financial arrangement in exchange for quiet deed of access and a waiver of claim to the chamber's contents. This preserves your family relationships, or what remains of them, and resolves the dispute quickly. Maya thought about Carmen bringing a real estate agent to dinner without asking. About Victor's phone call, the specific architecture of it, designed to flush her out. About Raoul's smile in Franklin Archuleta's office. The ornamental well cover. That's the well cover. I guess that makes sense. What's option 3? Patricia had not moved or changed expression. Option 3. You document everything. Engage a licensed appraiser to evaluate the contents of the chamber, establish the full value of the asset, and then simultaneously pursue the legal claim and make the situation public in a way that creates accountability. Make it difficult for anyone to contest your claim quietly. Contested fortunes are easier to steal in private than in public. Maya thought about that for a moment. If the value of what's in the chamber becomes public, every person in the Torres family will have a lawyer on this within a week. Yes. And journalists. Almost certainly. And people I've never met who will claim some connection. That is the standard pattern, yes. Maya looked at the window, at the narrow Santa Fe street outside, the old adobes, the November blue of the sky above them. She thought about Antonio Torres writing his ledger in 1932, column by column, weight by weight, building a record because he was a man who believed you should be able to account for what you possess. She thought about Ernesto sitting on the back porch in August with the mountains going purple. You think small because the world told you to. How long would it take to get a licensed appraiser into the chamber? She said, if I make the call today, I can have someone at the property by Friday. Make the call, Maya said, and then tell me how to protect what my grandfather left me. The appraiser's name was David Reyes, no relation to Delia, a man in his early 60s who had spent 30 years assessing precious metals for estates, insurance companies, and government institutions, and who carried himself with the particular tranquility of someone who had seen too many remarkable things to be easily surprised. He arrived at the farmhouse on Friday morning in a dark green Subaru with equipment cases in the back and a manner that suggested he had agreed to the confidentiality requirements Patricia Osei had laid out in their call without needing to be convinced. Carmen did not know he was coming. Neither did Victor. Patricia had advised Maya that under current law, she had the right to access the chamber to conduct an assessment before any legal claim was filed, and that access through the back gate, for which she had a key, on her grandfather's property before Carmen had formally taken possession of it, was permissible. It was a narrow window, and they all knew it. They moved through it quickly and carefully. Maya descended the shaft again. This time she brought David Reyes's assessment equipment in the canvas bag. She opened the chamber door and propped the shop light at the ledge opening so the beam reached into the space. She had been calm during the first descent. This time, standing again on the ledge with the light streaming into the chamber, she was something more than calm. She was settled. The kind of settled that comes when a thing that was uncertain becomes certain, when the ground under your feet proves itself solid enough to hold. She watched David Reyes descend after her and stand at the ledge and look into the chamber for a long, still moment without speaking. 42 crates, he said finally, counting. Then he lowered himself through the chamber door and went to work. He worked for 3 hours. He was methodical and unhurried. He opened each crate carefully, documented the contents, applied his assessment instruments, recorded weights and purity assessments and form classifications in his own ledger. He cross-referenced against Antonio's original records, comparing the 1941 weights against what was present now, confirming the preservation had been near perfect in the sealed, dry, temperature-stable chamber. He took photographs. He spoke quietly into a recorder as he worked, narrating his findings in the specific technical language of his profession. Maya sat on the ledge for most of those 3 hours, feet hanging above the 15-foot drop back to the shaft floor, her back against the cold stone, the shop light throwing a rectangle of white into the chamber below her, listening to David Reyes move between the crates with the sounds of careful, expert work. At one point, Sophia's face appeared at the top of the shaft, far above, small and round in the gray circle of sky. Mom, you okay? I'm fine. How's Mateo? He's made a diagram of the well shaft on graph paper. It's very detailed. Of course it is. He says he wants to be a structural engineer now instead of just an engineer. Tell him I'm proud of him. Sophia's face disappeared. Maya sat on the ledge and listened to David Reyes work and thought about nothing in particular, which was something she had not been able to do in longer than she could accurately remember. Not the numbers, not the math, not the calculations running behind her eyes like a second language. Just the cold stone and the still air and the sounds of work being done carefully in the dark. David Reyes came back to the ledge after 3 hours and 12 minutes. He climbed through the chamber door and stood beside her and looked at his ledger and was quiet for a moment with the expression of someone organizing information before delivering it. "The preservation is extraordinary," he said. "The chamber maintains a consistent temperature and humidity year-round. The crates are intact. The contents are in better condition than most institutional holdings I assess." "And the value?" He had prepared a single summary page. He held it in the light and read from it in the even, professional tone of a man who had delivered numbers like this to people who were not prepared for them, and had learned to deliver them anyway, clearly and without embellishment. The total weight, the current spot value, the assessment of the coin collection, which included pieces of significant numismatic value beyond their gold weight alone. The aggregate assessment, combining spot value, numismatic premium, and institutional rarity assessment. $323 million. And some change. The sum change was $411,000. Maya noticed that. Later, she would tell Delia that the detail that had made the number feel real was not the $323 million, but the $411,000. Because that was a number she could understand, a number that had a texture she recognized, a number that lived in the same world she had always lived in. She sat on the ledge with her feet hanging and the shop light throwing shadows and the number in the air between her and the appraiser. "Is this real?" she said. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It was the same question Mateo had asked 3 days ago. David Reyes looked at her over his ledger. "It's real," he said. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never seen anything quite like it. Your great-grandfather was a careful man." "He was," she said. "He really was." The phone call from Victor came on Saturday morning at 8:17. She was at the dry cleaning shop, an hour into her shift, the first customer of the day already at the counter with a silk blouse and the manner of someone who had never once wondered whether the person taking her garment was also doing the math on her electricity bill. She stepped into the back room and answered. "I heard someone was at the property Friday." Victor's voice was still professionally pleasant, but the effort was showing now, the pleasantness sitting on top of something else. Some kind of assessment team. She kept her voice neutral. Carmen had told him, or had had someone watching the property, or had asked one of the neighbors. It didn't matter which. "I had the well cover assessed. It's mine. I have the right to assess it." A pause. The well cover. Right. He seemed to be choosing words carefully now. "Maya, I want to help you with this. Whatever you've found, whatever's down there, you shouldn't be navigating this alone. You're not equipped for something like this. The legal complexities alone, I have a lawyer." A silence that was different from the previous ones. Shorter, sharper. "Who?" "Patricia Osei. In Santa Fe." Another silence. She heard him processing. "Osei is an estate litigator. That's a serious firm for a well cover." "Well," she said, and the word was precise. "It's a serious well." She could hear him recalibrating. Could hear the machine of it turning behind his voice. "Maya, I'm going to be straight with you. Carmen and I have been talking. There's a possibility that what's under that well platform is considered part of the property, not part of the cover specifically. We want to get that sorted out before anyone makes any claims they can't back up legally. Patricia is sorting it out. We're going to need to bring our own counsel in." "That's your right. You understand that if this goes to litigation, Victor." She said his name once, clearly. "I understand everything you're saying, and I want you to understand something. My grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote that will. He was 90 years old, and he was sharp as a tack, as he liked to say. He left me the cover because he knew what was in it. He left you and Carmen the land and the house. He made a choice. I'm going to honor it." She paused. "Patricia Osei is filing the documentation Monday morning. You'll receive a copy." She hung up, went back to the counter, took the silk blouse from the customer who was checking her phone and noted the ticket number and said, "It'll be ready Thursday," and smiled with the same precision she always did. Then she went back to work. The weekend was the longest weekend of Maya's life, and she had had some very long weekends. She went through the motions of her ordinary days with a carefulness that felt almost theatrical, washing dishes and checking homework and doing a rideshare shift Sunday evening while Mrs. Pacheco sat with the kids, picking up fares from the airport and the hotel strip and the downtown bars, driving through the Albuquerque night with the radio on low, while in her chest the knowledge of what was in the earth 60 miles south of her sat, like something physical, like a stone she was carrying. that was somehow lighter than it should have been. She thought about Antonio, alone in his ledger, recording every gram. She thought about what kind of man builds a locking mechanism into a well cover and passes the knowledge of it to exactly one person and trusts that person to wait for the right moment. She thought about Ernesto writing a letter in October, knowing he was running out of time, leaving it on the kitchen table under a dish towel with her name on the front. She thought about what it had taken, what kind of sustained and daily discipline, to protect something that large for that long without letting it change you, without letting it make you afraid or greedy or unable to sit on a porch in the evenings and watch the mountains. On Sunday night after the kids were in bed, she sat on the fold-out couch in the dark with her phone and looked at the photographs of Antonio's ledger. Page by page, the columns. Date, weight, form, source, running total. She scrolled through them slowly. She read the numbers not as a fortune, but as a record of a life, of choices made during the worst economic collapse in American history, by a man who had watched everything he owned disappear and decided it would never happen again, and had been systematic and precise and patient about making sure it wouldn't. She understood that man. She recognized him in the way you recognize a language you've been speaking all your life without being told its name. She was 36 years old. She worked 3 jobs. She ran numbers in her head at 4:51 in the morning and made dollar store birthday cakes and reshuffled $22 field trip costs in her imagination like a card trick. She had been her grandfather's granddaughter her whole life and hadn't known it. She turned off her phone and lay back on the fold-out and in the dark of the apartment, with the highway sound 3 blocks away and her children sleeping behind the bedroom door. She let herself cry. Not from grief this time. Not from sadness. From something she didn't have a clean word for. The specific feeling of a weight you have been carrying so long you'd forgotten the shape of your own body without it, beginning, very slowly, to lift. Patricia Osei filed the documentation on Monday morning as she'd said she would. By Monday afternoon, Victor had a lawyer. By Tuesday morning, Carmen had one too. By Tuesday evening, Raul had sent Maya a text message that was 2 sentences long and contained neither greeting nor punctuation and conveyed, in its brevity, something between accusation and threat. Patricia called Maya that evening. Her voice was even. They're moving fast. Carmen's attorney filed a preliminary claim asserting the chamber and its contents are subsurface assets of the property she inherited. Victor's filing is similar but frames it as a family estate dispute, arguing the will was made under undue influence. Maya sat at the kitchen table with the apartment quiet around her. Both kids in bed. The red-bordered electricity bill still on the counter. She hadn't paid it yet because the checking account still said what it had always said, and she had not touched it, had not moved anything, had not changed a single number in the existing architecture of her life, because Patricia had told her to change nothing until the legal position was established. What does undue influence mean in this context? They're suggesting your grandfather favored you inappropriately, that the relationship between you was disproportionate to the share he left you, and that someone manipulated the will. It's a difficult claim to prove but expensive to defend against. I visited him every month for 11 years. I know. Carmen came twice a year. Victor came at Christmas and Easter. Neither of them stayed more than 4 hours. I know. I've reviewed the phone records you provided and the neighbors' affidavits. Franklin Archuleta has agreed to testify about Ernesto's mental clarity at the time the will was written. We have a strong position. But litigation is expensive and unpredictable, and they know that. They're betting you can't sustain a prolonged legal fight. They're betting you don't have the resources to outlast them. Maya looked at the electricity bill, at the red border that was the vocabulary of her ordinary life, the language she had been speaking since Daniel left, since before Daniel left, since she had understood as a young woman that the world had a particular grammar for people in her position, and that grammar was always about scarcity. What does it cost to outlast them? She said. Depending on how long they push it, $60,000. Maybe more. The number sat in the room. $60,000. 3 years of the rent she couldn't quite pay. A number that lived in the same galaxy as electricity bills and dollar store birthday supplies, and the $411,000 of some change in David Reyes's assessment summary. $323 million in the ground 60 miles south of her, and $60,000 standing between her and the right to claim it. She thought about that for a moment. about the specific architecture of that situation, about who built systems like that and why. Patricia, she said. Yes. I've been working 3 jobs since my husband left. I have $48 in my checking account. I cannot pay you $60,000. I know. So how does this work? Estate litigation can be financed against the anticipated recovery. I can structure our arrangement so that my fees are contingent on outcome. If we establish your claim, I take a percentage of the recovered value. If we don't, you owe nothing. And you think we established the claim? I think Ernesto Torres was a 90-year-old man who knew exactly what he was doing, left a paper trail to prove it, and chose you deliberately and specifically. I think the claim is strong. A pause. I also think the moment we present David Reyes's assessment in court, whatever your family is planning to contest will become significantly more complicated for them. People who litigate over small inheritances can sustain a fight. People who are suddenly litigating over $323 million in gold attract a different kind of attention. Journalists, Maya said, among others. She looked at the table, at the worn surface of it, the ring marks from coffee mugs, the small notch near the edge that Mateo had made with his compass in 2nd grade while doing a geometry assignment and had been deeply apologetic about. More apologetic than the situation required, because he was the kind of child who took his errors seriously. Make it public, she said. The assessment. All of it. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Once it's public, your life changes. Completely. Everything changes. My life, Maya said, needs to change. Silence on the line, brief and considered. I'll prepare the press release, Patricia said. It broke on a Thursday. Santa Fe New Mexican first, then Albuquerque Journal, then AP, then National. Maya Torres, 36, a dry cleaning and rideshare worker in Albuquerque, had inherited a secret chamber beneath a New Mexico farm well containing $323 million in gold assembled over 9 years by her great-grandfather Antonio Torres, a Depression-era mining assayer, and protected for 60 additional years by her grandfather Ernesto Torres, who at age 90 had left the access mechanism to his granddaughter exclusively after a lifetime of monthly visits. The family dispute angle wrote itself. The photographs of the farmhouse, the well, the stone platform, the iron-edged cover with its carved suns, the ledger, the letters, the 42 crates in the sealed, pristine chamber, preserved by Antonio's engineering for 80 years as if they had been waiting for exactly this day. Maya's phone began ringing at 7:12 Thursday morning, 12 minutes after the story posted online. By 8 o'clock, she had 47 missed calls. By noon, it was 211. She turned off the ringer and put the phone in her locker at the dry cleaning shop and worked her shift because she had a shift to work and she was still the same person she had been on Wednesday. Her supervisor, a woman named Rosa who had always treated Maya fairly, found her in the pressing room at 10 and said, carefully, "You don't have to be here today, you know." "I know," Maya said. "I want to be." "You sure?" Maya pressed a button-down shirt with the same precision she always used. "Rosa, I've been coming here for 4 years. Whatever happens next, I'm going to finish my shift today." Rosa looked at her for a moment with an expression that was something between professional and personal. Then she nodded and left. At 3 o'clock, when the shift ended, Maya walked to her car in the parking lot and found Victor leaning against it. He was in a suit he hadn't been wearing at 8 in the morning, which meant he had driven from wherever he'd been, had changed, had staged this arrival with some consideration. His expression was the one he wore when he was being reasonable at someone. She stopped 3 feet away. "Maya," his voice was warm and careful. "I want to talk. Not as adversaries. As family." She looked at him. At the suit. At the expression. At the car she had driven for 8 years and would keep driving until it quit. "Victor," she said, "your lawyer filed papers saying my grandfather made his will under undue influence. That was premature. I'm willing to have those papers withdrawn." "In exchange for what?" He spread his hands. The gesture was designed to look open, generous, the posture of a man making a reasonable offer. A settlement. Something fair for everyone. "Carmen and I aren't trying to take what's yours. We just want to make sure this is handled right. You're not equipped. If you say I'm not equipped one more time," she said quietly, "I'm going to ask you to step away from my car." He stopped. She took her keys out of her bag. "You called me 3 months ago and told me to go get the well cover before Carmen could fill in the well. You had someone watching the property Friday when I brought the appraiser in. You filed papers Monday morning saying my grandfather's will was made under undue influence. She looked at him steadily. You have not called me once in the last 4 years to see how I was doing. You haven't called me since Daniel left. You didn't come when Ernesto went to the hospital too. Years ago, when I called you and left a message. You came to Christmas and Easter and you talked about the mineral rights. Victor opened his mouth. She kept going. He left me the cover. He left me the key. He wrote me a letter. He wrote his father a letter. His father wrote a ledger with every entry accounted for because he was a man who believed you should be able to account for what you possess. She unlocked her car. I can account for what I possess, Victor. Patricia Osei is going to make sure of that. She got in the car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, Victor stood in the parking lot with his hand still extended in the shape of the generous gesture, the one that was supposed to be the beginning of a reasonable arrangement. And she watched him get smaller, and then she turned a corner, and he was gone. She drove. The highway going north toward Albuquerque stretched straight ahead of her in the afternoon light, and she drove it the way she had driven it 1,000 times before, one hand on the wheel, check engine light glowing steady orange on the dash, the mountains to the east turning the first colors of late afternoon. Her phone buzzed from the passenger seat. She glanced at the screen. A text from Sophia. Mom, the news is talking about you on TV. Mateo says you're famous now. Is this real? She smiled. She dictated a response without taking her eyes off the road. It's real. I'll be home in an hour. Start your homework. Sophia's reply came back in seconds. Already done. Also, Mrs. Pacheco brought us tamales. She says she always knew you were special. Maya laughed. In the car alone, driving north, she laughed with her full chest, the kind of laugh that had been waiting for a long time to come out. She was 36 years old. She had $48 in her checking account and $323 million in the earth, and her daughter had finished her homework and her son had made an engineering diagram and Mrs. Pacheco had brought tamales. She had a lawyer who had described her position as strong and a grandfather who had trusted her with the weight of a secret that had outlasted a world war and a depression and 60 years of an ordinary, extraordinary life. She drove home. The days that followed were not peaceful, but they had a shape to them, a forward direction that the days before had not always possessed. Patricia Osei was in the newspapers every morning with precise statements that left no room for misinterpretation. David Reyes's assessment was public record. The photographs of the ledger, of Antonio's hand recording every acquisition, were on every major news outlet. A historian from UNM had written a rapid commentary piece about Depression-era gold conversion that corroborated every aspect of Antonio's story with the broader documented record of what men in his profession and position had done during those years. Victor's attorney withdrew the undue influence claim on a Wednesday, 2.5 weeks after filing it. Carmen's attorney filed a modified claim, narrowed now to the subsurface assets question, the chamber contents as property of the land. Patricia met it with case law and the documentation of Ernesto's specific intent. The legal negotiation that followed was sharp and expensive for everyone involved, and Patricia handled it with the precision of someone who had structured for exactly this. Maya went to work every day. She picked up her kids. She made dinner. She paid the electricity bill on time for the first time in 3 months because she had borrowed against her anticipated recovery, a formal arrangement Patricia had structured, enough for the immediate obligations. She did not change anything else. Not yet. She was waiting for the moment when she could change everything right rather than anything fast. The settlement with Carmen was reached on a gray December morning in Patricia's office. Carmen came with her attorney and sat across the table from Maya and Patricia with the expression of a woman who had run her own calculations and arrived at the conclusion that the mathematics of continued litigation were worse than the mathematics of a negotiated agreement. Carmen would receive a payment of $4 million from Maya's recovery, in exchange for a full and final waiver of claim to the chamber and its contents, deed of access, and a written acknowledgement that the contents of the chamber were the exclusive property of Maya Elena Torres. Carmen signed. She did not look at Maya when she did it. She looked at the pen, and then she looked at the wall, and then her attorney gathered the papers, and they left. After they were gone, Patricia set her pen down and looked at Maya across the table. Victor's next, she said. He's going to be harder. I know, Maya said. He's retained 2 additional attorneys. He's building a case on multiple angles. I know. She looked at the table. Patricia, when this is resolved, everything resolved, what does the number actually look like? What do I walk away with? Patricia pulled out a summary page. She had been waiting for this question and had prepared for it. After taxes, which are substantial and unavoidable, after legal fees, after the Carmen settlement, after the financing costs, you're looking at a net of approximately $190 to $210 million, depending on gold price at point of liquidation and how Victor's situation resolves. $190 to $210 million. Maya looked at the summary page for a long time. She thought about the fold-out couch, the check engine light, the dollar store birthday supplies, and the ramen and the electricity bill with the red border, and the specific quality of the early morning dark at 4:51 when the alarm went off, and she was already awake because she'd been awake since 4:15 running the numbers. She thought about Mateo saying we need to be smart about this, 8 years old, standing at the edge of a well shaft in November. She thought about Sophia's hand over hers in the diner in Belen, about Delia saying you actually understand what this means. She thought about the month, years ago, when Ernesto had looked at her sideways on the back porch and said you think small because the world told you to. And she thought about how she had laughed because she hadn't known what else to do with that. Because she had been 33 years old and small had been all the world had ever shown her was available. One more question, she said. Of course. Victor. She looked up. Is there any version of this where I settle with him fairly? Where I give him and Carmen and Raul something real? Something that actually reflects what the family deserved if my grandfather had divided things differently. Patricia looked at her steadily. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that $323 million is an enormous amount of money to have come from one man's work and one family's land. I'm thinking that Victor and Carmen are not good people, but they are my grandfather's children. And I'm thinking that what I do with this is part of the inheritance too, not just the gold. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, we could structure a final settlement. Something real. Something they couldn't legitimately argue was unfair, given what they actually contributed to the estate. It would require Victor dropping everything entirely, no further claims, full cooperation. And if he agrees, then we close this cleanly. You take the majority. They take something real rather than nothing. And you don't spend the next 3 years in litigation. Maya looked at the summary page one more time. Let's make the offer, she said. Let's do this right. Outside Patricia's window, Santa Fe moved through its December afternoon, and the light on the adobe walls was the particular gold of late winter sun in the high desert, the color of something old and warm and enduring. She pulled out her phone and texted Sophia. Tell Mateo I said the number. 3 seconds later, Sophia's reply. He says he already knew. He says great-great-grandpa Antonio was very smart. Maya smiled. He really was, she typed back. She put her phone in her jacket pocket, next to where Ernesto's letter had been on the day she'd found it, and she sat in Patricia Osei's office in the December light and waited for the rest of her life to begin. Victor took 11 days to respond to the settlement offer. Patricia had predicted 7 to 14, so 11 was within range, which meant it was neither a capitulation nor a provocation. It was the decision of a man who had run his own numbers and arrived, slowly and probably painfully, at the conclusion that what was being offered was better than what litigation would eventually produce. The offer Patricia had structured was this. Victor, Carmen, and Raul would each receive $2 million from Maya's recovery, delivered upon signing of a full and final waiver of all claims, present and future, against the estate of Ernesto Torres and against Maya Elena Torres personally. In exchange, they would provide full written cooperation with the title transfer, a public statement acknowledging the legitimacy of Maya's inheritance, and a permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding the specifics of the settlement amounts. $6 million total. In the geography of $323 million, it was precise and considered. Enough to be real. Not enough to be a reward for behavior that had been, from the first phone call, an attempt to take something that wasn't theirs. Patricia had called it fair. Maya had called it enough. They had both been right. Victor's attorney called Patricia on a Tuesday. The conversation, as Patricia reported it, was brief and professional in the manner of men who have been in rooms together many times and have learned to conduct defeat without annotating it. The papers were signed on a Thursday. Victor came alone, without Donna, without Raul. He sat across the conference table from Maya and Patricia and signed each page where his attorney had marked them, and his face carried the expression of a man who was maintaining composure through the discipline of long practice. The face you make when you have been in business long enough to have lost before and know that what you project into losing matters. When he finished, he set the pen down and looked at Maya. She waited. He said, "Your grandfather knew what he was doing." It was not an apology. It was not a concession beyond the legal document he had just signed. But it was the truth, stated plainly, and it was the first true thing he had said to her in as long as she could remember. "He did," she said. Victor stood. He buttoned his jacket with the careful precision of a man reassembling himself. He looked at her one more time, and in his face, beneath the composure and beneath the discipline, was something she recognized because she had seen it in the mirror on the mornings when the math wouldn't come out right, and the electricity bill had a red border, and the alarm was going off at 4:51, and she was already awake. It was the look of someone who has understood, too late, what they should have valued. He left without shaking hands. Patricia closed the door behind him. In the quiet of the office, Maya sat for a moment with her hands flat on the table. The same window with the same December light. Everything the same, and everything completely different. "It's done," Patricia said. "It's done," Maya agreed. She pulled out her phone and called Delia. The logistics of $323 million in gold are not simple, and Maya had known from the beginning that the transition from the earth to the world would require the same kind of patience and precision that Antonio had applied to putting it there. David Reyes coordinated the extraction with a licensed transport firm that Patricia had vetted. The crates came up out of the earth in a sealed operation, documented at every stage, transported to a federally licensed secure facility in Albuquerque, where the formal cataloging and liquidation process began. Maya did not watch the crates come up. She had been there for the descent, for the discovery, for the first look at the sealed chamber. She did not need to be there for the logistics. She trusted David Reyes, who had earned that trust in 3 hours of careful work on a November Friday, and she stayed in Albuquerque with her kids and let the careful people do the careful work. What she did instead, on the Saturday morning of the extraction, was drive to the farmhouse one last time. Alone. Kids with Mrs. Pacheco. Delia offered to come and Maya said no, gently and clearly, because some things need to be done by one person. She parked in the gravel drive and went through the back gate and stood in the yard. The well shaft was open, the cover standing aside, the last of the operation completing itself below. She stayed back from the equipment and the workers and found a place to stand near the barn, in the pale December sun, and looked at the yard the way Ernesto had looked at it for the last time when his knees told him to stop fixing things himself. With the full attention of someone who is saying goodbye to a thing they have loved. The hawk was gone from the cottonwood. The nest was still there, empty now, tucked into the high branches. She supposed the hawk had moved on. She supposed that was what hawks did. She thought about Antonio, who had come from Chihuahua with nothing and built something from the desert floor up. She thought about Ernesto, who had spent 90 years being the kind of man who watched the mountains go purple in the evenings and called his granddaughter every Sunday at 6. She thought about the particular patience required to protect something for 60 years without letting it make you strange, without letting it eat you the way Eleanor Whitfield's secret had eaten her, without letting the weight of it collapse into fear. Ernesto had not been afraid. That was the thing she kept coming back to. He had known what was in the well his entire adult life, and it had not made him cautious or cold or calculating. He had sat on his porch and tended his garden and maintained his fences and called her every Sunday and told her about the hawk. He had been, she thought, the freest man she had ever known, because he understood that what he was protecting was not just weight in the earth. It was a choice, a future choice, for someone who deserved to make it. He had given her the choice. She stood in the yard until the equipment crew finished, and the foreman came to tell her they were done, and then she locked the gate behind her, got in her car, and drove back to Albuquerque. She did not look in the rearview mirror. She was looking at the road ahead. The net figure, after taxes, after fees, after settlements, after all the careful arithmetic of law and finance, and the specific cost of claiming what was yours, was $194 million. Patricia delivered it in her office in January, a clean white page with the number at the top and the account information below. Maya read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket, in the same place she had carried Ernesto's letter for 2 months, and said thank you to Patricia with the full weight of what that meant. She drove home. She picked up Sofia and Mateo from school herself, which she had been able to do every day for the last 3 weeks because she had taken a leave of absence from the dry cleaning shop and the rideshare driving and the grocery stock shifts. She had not resigned from any of them. She had not made any permanent decisions about her working life. Patricia had counseled patience, and she had agreed with the counsel because she was a person who understood that patience was not the same as passivity. In the car on the way home, Mateo said, "Mom, what are we doing with the money?" He asked it the same way he asked everything, directly, without preamble, as if the question had been waiting at the front of his mind and he had simply decided it was time to let it out. "We're going to be careful about it," she said. "How careful?" "Very careful. We're going to think about it seriously before we change anything big. We're going to make sure we do it right." "Are we going to move?" "Eventually." "Yes." "To a house with a yard?" She glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was looking at her with the direct, serious gaze of someone who wants a real answer and can tell the difference between one and a placating one. "To a house with a yard," she said. He nodded, satisfied, and went back to his sketchbook. Sofia reached over and patted his arm with the fond condescension of an older sibling. "He's had the yard on a list," Sofia said, "since we talked about this in November." "What's on the list?" Maya said. "Yard," Mateo said without looking up. "A room with a door. A garage, so he can see what the inside of a garage looks like. A kitchen table that isn't also the dining room table." "They're the same table," Maya said. "They shouldn't be." She drove and smiled and did not say anything else, and the three of them went home to the fold-out couch and the one-bedroom and the coffee maker and the check engine light, and ate dinner together the way they had eaten every dinner, with Mateo asking questions about engineering and Sofia reading at the table when she thought her mother wasn't watching, and the apartment small around them and full of the specific warmth of people who have always made do and have learned that making do is not. The same is not enough. She went back to the dry cleaning shop on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the net figure page, to resign properly and in person. Rosa was at the counter when she came in. She looked up, and something in her expression said she'd been expecting this, had been expecting it since the news broke in December, had perhaps been surprised Maya hadn't come sooner. "I wanted to do this right," Maya said. "I know you did." Rosa came around the counter. She was 61 and had run this shop for 22 years and had a quality of steadiness that Maya had always respected. "You don't have to explain anything. I want to. You treated me fairly. I want you to know that I know that." Rosa looked at her for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" Maya had been thinking about this. Had been thinking about it on the fold-out couch and in the car and in the early mornings at 4:51 when the alarm went off, and she was still waking up at 4:15 from habit, from the long training of necessity. "I'm going to build something," she said. "I don't know the full shape of it yet, but it starts with my grandfather's name." Rosa nodded. She reached under the counter and pulled out a card. "My niece works in nonprofit law. If you need someone who knows how to set up a foundation properly, call her." Maya took the card. She looked at it. A business card, plain white, from a woman she'd never met, offered by someone who had treated her fairly for 4 years and was sending her off with one more act of ordinary kindness. "Thank you, Rosa," she said. "Go do something good," Rosa said. "You've been doing good in hard circumstances your whole life. Imagine what you'll do with resources." She kept the rideshare account active for 1 more week. Not because she needed to, not because she was afraid to stop, but because she had irregulars, the kind that rideshare drivers accumulate without meaning to, people who requested her specifically, who recognized her car and asked about the kids and tipped the way people tip when they've decided they trust you. She drove that last week and told each of them, in her way, without oversharing, that she was stepping back, that it had been good, that she hoped they found good drivers. One of her regulars, a woman named Barbara who rode to the airport every other Tuesday for work trips, said, "You're the driver who found the gold, aren't you? I saw it on the news." Maya glanced in the rearview mirror. "I inherited it. From my grandfather." "That's a good story. It's a true one." Barbara was quiet for a moment. "Then, what are you going to do with it?" "Something that lasts," Maya said. "Something my great-grandfather would recognize." The house came in February. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with a table that was only a kitchen table, a garage, a yard with an old apple tree in the back corner that Sophia immediately declared was hers, and a room for Mateo with a door that closed. The neighborhood was 20 minutes from the school they had always attended because Maya had been deliberate about not pulling them out of their ordinary life any faster than necessary. New house, same school, same friends, same Mrs. Pacheco 2 blocks away who still brought tamales on significant occasions. Moving day was a Saturday. Delia brought her brother-in-law with his truck. Mrs. Pacheco brought food. The kids each carried their own boxes with a seriousness that the occasion deserved. Maya carried the fold-out couch to the curb herself, one end at a time, and stood beside it for a moment before the donation truck came. She had slept on that couch for 4 years, had run the numbers on it every morning since Daniel left, the 451 calculations, the rent math and the grocery math and the electricity bill math, had cried on it in the dark when the kids were asleep, the specific crying of someone who is maintaining a face for everyone else and can only put it down alone, had also laughed on it, had also read on it, had also sat on it on Sunday evenings at 6 and talked to Ernesto about the hawk. The donation truck came. She watched the couch go. She went inside her house, and made coffee in the kitchen and sat at the kitchen table that was only a kitchen table and looked out the window at the February yard and the bare apple tree and thought, this is the first morning of a different kind. The Torres Family Foundation was registered in March. The name had come to her on one of the early mornings, for 51, the alarm going off, and her already awake. She had been thinking about what Patricia had said, weeks before the settlement, about what she wanted to build. Something that lasts. Something her great-grandfather would recognize. Antonio Torres had been a man who converted survival into permanence, who took the most volatile thing, money, and turned it into the most stable thing, metal, and locked it in the earth and trusted his family to find the right moment for it. The foundation's purpose was specific, and she had been specific about it deliberately, because she had seen what happened when purpose was too broad, how it became nothing, how good intentions without structure drained away into the same ground they meant to water. The Torres Family Foundation would provide direct financial assistance to single parents in New Mexico who were working 2 or more jobs and had children in school. Not grants that required 12 forms and a 6-month review process. Direct assistance. Monthly support, structured carefully to avoid tax complications, covering the gap between what people earned and what stability actually cost. Rent, utilities, school fees, the $22 field trip, the birthday supplies that shouldn't have to come from the dollar store. Not forever. For 2 years per family, enough time to stabilize, enough time to breathe, enough time to make a decision about what came next from a position of something other than pure emergency. With access to vocational training and community college tuition support at the end of the 2 years for those who wanted it. She had thought about this for a long time, had argued with herself about whether it was too small, whether $300 million should be building hospitals or endowing universities or changing policy. And she had come back, every time, to the fold-out couch, to the 451 alarm, to the red-bordered electricity bill and the $22 field trip and the dollar store birthday cake that Lily, in Sarah Mitchell's story, had called the best birthday ever because she loved her mother and knew that her mother was trying. What people needed, she had decided, was not to be saved. They were already surviving. They were already doing the extraordinary daily work of making things work in circumstances that weren't built for people like them. What they needed was the gap closed. Just the gap. The distance between what they were already doing and what stability felt like. Give someone that gap for 2 years, and they could move themselves. She knew. She had been one of them. David Reyes sat on the foundation board. So did Rosa's niece, who turned out to be exactly as competent as Rosa had implied. So did a woman named Carmen Vigil who had no relation to Aunt Carmen, and who ran a successful workforce development nonprofit in Las Cruces, and had been doing the kind of work Maya was describing for 20 years on a fraction of the budget. The first cohort of foundation recipients was 40 families. 40 families in New Mexico who had applied through a simple process, 3 pages, no legal language, reviewed by a panel that included 2 social workers and a teacher who had spent 30 years watching the specific ways that financial instability derailed otherwise capable children. Maya read every application, all 40 of them, and the 200 more that didn't make the first cohort. She read them the way she had read the electricity bill, carefully and completely, because they deserved the full attention of someone who understood every word. Raoul called her in April. It was the first time he had called her since the will reading, and she almost didn't answer, and then she answered because she was not the kind of person who avoided things. He said, "I want to apologize." She waited. "In the attorney's office." "What I said? About the well cover. I was an ass." The word landed without drama. It was accurate, and he knew it was accurate, and saying it took something, which she noted. "Yes," she said. "You were." "I didn't understand what it was. I thought it was nothing. I thought," he stopped. Started again. "My dad had us convinced that you were the outlier. The one who didn't know the value of things. That coming every month was some kind of play. That nobody actually just showed up for an old man because they loved him." She let the sentence sit for a moment. "Your grandfather was one of the best people I've ever known," she said. "And I visited him because I loved him. That's the whole reason." Raoul was quiet. "The $2 million your dad agreed to," she said. "Use some of it for something you can look at in 20 years and feel okay about." "That's what I'd do." He said, "Okay," quietly, the way people say things when they mean them without ornamentation. They hung up. She did not know what he would do with the advice, whether it would mean anything or whether it would dissolve into the ordinary forward motion of a life that had not been changed the way hers had. She did not need to know. She had said the true thing, and that was her part of it. The warehouse was still there in April, the same building, the same concrete and steel and forklift sounds, the same fluorescent lights humming above the same floor. Maya had not gone near it since she'd last worked her shift in November. She had not intended to go near it at all. But she was driving across town on a foundation errand, taking a document to a notary whose office happened to be 3 blocks from the warehouse, and she passed the employee entrance on the way. She didn't slow down. She didn't stop. She drove past at the speed of ordinary traffic, the Impala's engine doing its steady familiar work, and she looked at the entrance as she passed, the gray door, and the clock-in panel, and the parking lot where she had stood for 4 years in the cold and the heat, and the intermediate weather, timing the bus. Calculating the walk. Richard Voss was standing outside the entrance. She recognized him at 40 feet, the particular posture of him, the arms crossed, the expression he wore when he was on a break and surveying the parking lot with the satisfaction of a man who had confused supervision with significance. He was looking at his phone and did not look up as she passed. She kept driving. She did not feel the surge of vindication she had once imagined she might feel. In the abstract, in the version of this moment she had sometimes constructed in the early mornings when the numbers were bad and she needed something to carry. She had imagined, in those moments, that there would be something sharp and satisfying about driving past in changed circumstances, about the man who had said people like you don't buy houses seeing proof that she had. But the feeling she actually had was simpler and quieter than that. She was glad she had kept working through every shift. Glad she had not quit in anger, had not given him the satisfaction of having driven her out. Glad she had been the person who finished her shifts and said, "Yes, Mr. Voss," and held the knowledge of her own value inside her chest without needing him to confirm it. The foundation had 40 families now. In 2 years it would have 100. In 5 years more. Each one of those families was a Maya Torres from some particular November, standing at a well in November light with the question of what came next still open above them. Richard Voss was still there in the parking lot behind her, getting smaller in the mirrors, and then she turned a corner, and he was simply gone, the way things go when you stop looking at them, and she drove on. Sophia turned 11 in June. They had the party in the backyard, the one with the apple tree that Sophia had declared was hers. Mrs. Pacheco came with tamales. Delia came with her family. 6 of Sophia's classmates came with the particular energetic chaos of children who have been given a backyard and told it's a party. Maya stood at the kitchen door watching the yard and held a coffee mug and did not run any numbers in her head. She noticed the absence of it, the way you notice a sound that has stopped, the specific quiet where calculation used to live. The yard was full of noise and children and her daughter in the apple tree showing someone how to climb to the second branch, and Mateo at the edge of the group explaining something structural about the tree's trunk geometry to a friend who was trying to be polite about listening. Delia came to stand beside her. "Last year," Delia said, "you bought her a plastic tiara from the dollar store." "I did. This year you gave her an apple tree." She claimed it. "I just bought the house it came with." Delia laughed. They stood together watching the yard. You doing okay? Delia said. The question was real, not rhetorical. I'm doing really okay, Maya said, and meant it with the full weight of what really meant. Not perfectly. Not without the residue of 4 years of the fold-out couch and the early mornings. Not without the occasional 4:51 waking, the ghost of the alarm, the ghost of the numbers. But okay in the way that has substance in it. That isn't just the absence of bad, but the presence of something good. Something she had built from the raw material of her grandfather's trust and her great-grandfather's patience and her own daily stubborn refusal to believe that small was all there was. He would have liked this, Delia said. Meaning Ernesto. He would have liked the apple tree, Maya said. He would have told me something about pruning it in February. Would he have been right? He was always right about things that grew. They stood in the June afternoon and watched Sophia in the apple tree and Mateo explaining structural integrity to a patient friend, and the foundation had 40 families, and the electricity bill was paid, and the table in the kitchen was only a kitchen table. She went back to Belen once more in July. The farmhouse had been sold. Carmen had put it on the market in March, and it had sold to a family from Albuquerque who wanted land outside the city. The new family had young children and a dog, and when Maya drove slowly past on the county road, she could see evidence of them through the fence line, a swing set in the side yard, a vegetable garden in the front where Ernesto's flower beds had been. She was glad the house had a family in it, glad it had noise and children and a dog and a vegetable garden. Houses needed living. She parked on the road and looked at the cottonwood through the fence. The hawk's nest was still there, empty in the high branches. She looked at it for a while. Then she got out of the car and stood at the fence and took a photograph of the nest, the same photograph she could have taken any time in the last 8 months, but hadn't, because she hadn't been ready for this particular goodbye. She thought about calling Ernesto. The reflex was still there, would probably always be there, the Sunday evening 6 o'clock shape of reaching for the phone. She thought, I would tell him about the foundation, about the 40 families, about Sophia's apple tree and Mateo's room with a door and the kitchen table, about Patricia Osei and David Reyes and Rose's niece, about driving past the warehouse and feeling nothing complicated, about Raul's apology and what she'd said to him. He would have listened without interrupting. He would have said, at the end, something simple and precise that held more weight than a longer sentence. He would have asked about the hawk. She looked at the empty nest in the cottonwood. Thank you, abuelo, she said, out loud. In the July air, with the mountains visible in the east, and the sun high and the scrubland stretching in every direction, golden and still. Thank you for trusting me with it. The cottonwood moved in the small wind. The nest held its place in the branches. She stood there for another minute, full and quiet. And then she got back in the car and drove north toward Albuquerque, toward her house and her children and the work that was waiting, toward the life that had been there all along, the one that had simply needed what her great-grandfather had known all along was the most powerful thing in the world. Time. And the right person to give it to. The Foundation's first annual report came out in October. 40 families. 14 months of operation. 40 families who had received stable support during what the report described, in clean professional language, as a period of structural financial vulnerability. The numbers in the report were precise and clear. Average rent gap, closed per family per month. Average reduction in secondary job hours per supported parent. Average improvement in children's academic attendance. Maya read the report with the same attention she had once given to electricity bills, because numbers were still her language, would always be her language, but the numbers in this report pointed in a direction the old numbers never had. Forward, outward, toward. People rather than away from trouble. She read one line 3 times. 14 of the 40 supported families reported being able to reduce working hours from 3 or more jobs to 2 or fewer, allowing for increased parental presence in children's educational development during the support period. 14 families. 14 mothers or fathers who had, for the first time in years, an evening that wasn't a commute, a morning that wasn't a calculation, a Saturday that was something other than a second shift. 14 versions of the fold-out couch that had not been slept on that night because someone had finally been able to afford the bedroom. She sent the report to Delia with no message. Delia replied in 30 seconds. He would be so proud of you. She replied, he already knew. Because he had. That was the thing she had come to understand in the 14 months since she'd found the letter under the dish towel. He had not gambled on her. He had not hoped she would rise to it. He had known, had watched her for 36 years of Sunday phone calls and monthly visits, and the specific way she talked about Sophia and Mateo, and had known, with the certainty of a man who had spent 90 years learning to see clearly, that she was the right person. Not because she was the smartest person in the Torres family. Not because she was the most educated or the most professionally accomplished. Because she was the one who had come. Because she was the one who had understood that an old man in a farmhouse outside Belen was not a problem to be managed or an asset to be positioned, but a person to be loved, and had acted accordingly, every Sunday at 6 for 11 years, and every month in the car with the kids in the back, and the library books, and the snacks, and the 2 hours down, and the 2 hours back. Antonio had built something in the earth and trusted it to outlast him. Ernesto had protected it and trusted it to find her. She was building something in the world and trusting it to outlast all of them. That was the inheritance, not the gold, not the 323 million or the 194 that came out the other side of it. The gold was the vehicle. The inheritance was the understanding that what you build matters less than who you build it for, and that the right person, given the right tools and the right moment, will always know what to do. She still woke at 4:51 sometimes. Not every morning. Not with the alarm, which was now set for 6:30. But sometimes the old training surfaced from some deep place and pulled her awake in the dark, and she would lie in her bedroom in her house with the apple tree in the backyard and listen to the quiet of a neighborhood that was not separated from other people's noise by walls too thin to matter, and wait for the numbers to start. And they didn't. Not the old numbers. Not the rent and utilities and grocery math, the perpetual deficit calculation. Sometimes she ran the foundation numbers, the cohort sizes, and the support periods and the projections for the next 5 years. But those were different numbers. Those pointed at something. On one of those early mornings, in October, she lay awake and thought about Antonio writing his ledger. Page by page in 1932, 1933, 1934, the columns filling slowly, the running total growing. The man at his kitchen table in the house he had built himself, recording every gram with the discipline of someone who knew that the record was not for him, but for whoever came after. She understood that now in the way you understand things that are in your blood rather than just in your knowledge. She was keeping a different kind of record. The foundation report was her ledger. 40 families. 14 months. The running total pointing forward. She got up quietly and went to the kitchen and made coffee in the dark. The good coffee now. The kind that cost more than the red tin with the half-peeled price sticker, because she had decided that if there was one ordinary luxury she was going to allow herself without guilt, it was coffee that tasted the way coffee was supposed to taste, and made it and stood at the kitchen window in the October dark looking out at the yard and the apple tree and the mountains invisible in the distance. The world was still out there, doing what it did. The highway 3 miles away was a low hiss she could barely hear from this kitchen. The city breathing softly before chaos. And in 40 houses scattered across New Mexico, 40 families were asleep, their electricity bills paid, their rents covered, the specific arithmetic of survival not dominating every waking hour, the children dreaming in the way children dream when they are not aware of the weight their parents carry. She drank her coffee. She thought, Abuelo, here's what you gave me. You gave me rest. You gave me my mornings back. You gave me the space to turn around and hand that rest to someone else. That is the whole of it. That is every bit of it. She set down her mug and went back to bed and slept until 6:30, deeply and without calculation, in the house that was hers, in the life that was hers, in the forward direction of everything still to come. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.